And our first paper is going to be by Filippo. He's from Brazil. He is from Southern Adventist College in Paraná. Is that correct? Professor of the Old Testament, has been there for 6 years, and he finished his PhD in 2023. Apocalypticism on Daniel is a book that he's writing, right? Am I correct? And he's also participating in the forthcoming SD commentary. He's writing on Zacharias, and that's going to be his paper today. I would like to give him all the time that he deserves.
So, my title is Eschatological Existence and Trauma, Zechariah 9 through 14, and the reconstruction of Judah's shattered symbolic universe. Well, let's go straight into it, right? So the sociological concept of symbolic universe refers to the shared system of meanings, symbols, beliefs, and values that a society or social group uses to make sense of the world around them. It is a framework through which the individuals interpret their experiences, understand their place in society, and navigate social relationships. The symbolic universe encompasses the collective understanding of reality and provides a sense of coherence and legitimacy to the social order. Key aspects of the symbolic or of a symbolic universe include shared meanings, second, legitimization of social order, third, cohesion and integration of that same order, fourth, cultural and religious systems, fifth, social reality construction. The concept was most notably developed by sociologists such as Peter L. Berger and Thomas Luckman. They argued that the symbolic universe helps to create and maintain the social construction of reality, which individuals internalize and use to guide their behavior. In summary, the symbolic universe is the system of shared symbols and meanings that bind society together, provides a common framework for understanding the world, and legitimizes the social order. The relationship between trauma and the symbolic universe is a complex and important area of sociological inquiry. Trauma can challenge and destroy a community's symbolic universe, forcing individuals and communities to reconfigure their beliefs, values, and ways of making sense of the world. Erickson's classic distinction between individual and collective trauma here is useful for us. So he says, quote, "By individual trauma, I mean a blow to the psyche that breaks through one's defenses so suddenly and with such brutal force that one cannot react to it effectively. By collective trauma, on the other hand, I mean a blow to the basic tissues of social life that damages the bonds attaching people together and impairs the prevailing sense of communality. The collective trauma works its way slowly and even insidiously into the awareness of those who suffer from it. So it is a gradual realization that community no longer exists as an effective source of support, that an important part of the self has disappeared," close quote. Scholars have identified collective trauma as a central force shaping the trajectory of exilic and post-exilic prophecy, particularly in its efforts to reconstruct Judah's fractured symbolic universe. The devastation brought by the destruction of the Solomonic temple, the erosion of cultural and social cohesion, and the enduring psychological scars of war are powerfully reflected in prophetic literature. These texts convey vivid portrayals of national anxiety and personal anguish in the face of catastrophe, alongside compelling visions of restoration and renewal. Within this context, the reconfiguration of Israel's symbolic framework during and after the Babylonian exile posed a profound psychological challenge for community leaders. Robert P. Carroll, in his seminal study, applies Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance to examine how prophets navigated the dissonance between the hopeful promises of earlier prophecies and the stark reality of their apparent failure. Carroll argues that the structures of dissonance response evident in post-exilic texts point to a sustained process of interpretive adaptation. At the heart of his analysis is the claim that prophetic traditions underwent significant reinterpretation and a cumulative oracular response aimed at reconciling the perceived obsolescence of prior revelations with the evolving needs of a traumatized community. In my recent work, but the wise shall understand, published this year with more Zibek, I challenged the assumption that obsolescence is the primary driver behind the literary dynamics of post-exilic prophecy in relation to trauma. Focusing on the phenomenon of oracular reuse in Daniel 10 through 12, I argue that these texts do not merely reflect a response to failed prophecy, but rather articulate a divinely ordained agenda for restoration, aimed at healing the survivors' fractured symbolic world. This insight became even more apparent as I prepared my manuscript for the SDA IBC commentary on Zechariah 9 through 14, where it became increasingly evident that the prophetic voice is directed toward precisely this restorative mission. What follows are 6 distinct aspects of trauma that Zechariah 9 through 14 addresses in unexpectedly profound ways. There's no time for that, so I'll just do 2 of those points. Okay? So, first of them, reconstruction of identity. Trauma can lead to a profound shift in personal identity. The individual's understanding of who they are, their place in the world, and their relationships to others may need to be redefined. This is a direct result of the disruption caused to their symbolic universe by trauma, which influences how they view themselves and their future. The process of reconstructing one's identity after trauma can involve renegotiating their beliefs, their values, their relationship to the collective symbolic universe of the society they belong to. Zechariah 10, for example, offers a compelling theological vision of how a traumatized community, specifically post-exilic Israel, can reconstruct its shattered identity. Through rich agricultural imagery, prophetic critique, and covenantal renewal, the chapter speaks directly to the psychological and symbolic dislocation caused by trauma. When read through the lens of trauma theory, Zechariah 10 becomes a blueprint for communal healing and restoration. The chapter opens with a call to ask Yahweh for rain, invoking the latter rains of spring, a symbol deeply embedded in Israel's covenantal memory. Rain is not merely a meteorological event here, it signifies divine favor, spiritual maturity, and the regular rhythms of life that trauma often disrupts. By aligning the agricultural cycle with covenantal obedience, Zechariah reestablishes a symbolic universe in which time, nature, and divine presence are harmonized. This is crucial for a community emerging from exile, whose sense of place, purpose, and divine relationship has been fractured. Yet the text does not shy away from confronting the community's misguided attempts to reclaim meaning. Verse 2, for example, critiques the reliance on household gods, diviners, and false dreams, forms of spiritual escapism that offer empty consolation, says the text. These practices reflect a desperate search for control and comfort in the aftermath of trauma, but they ultimately deepen the disorientation. Zechariah exposes these false systems as deceptive and vain, urging the people to reject them and reorient themselves toward Yahweh. This theological deconstruction is essential for identity reconstruction. It clears away the rubble of false narratives and opens space for authentic renewal. The shepherd imagery further deepens the theme in the chapter. The people are described as sheep without a shepherd, wandering, afflicted, and vulnerable. This evokes the existential confusion of a community without trustworthy leadership, mirroring the psychological fragmentation of trauma survivors. Yahweh's anger against the corrupt shepherds is not merely punitive, it is restorative. By removing exploitative leaders, God makes way for a new kind of leadership, one that reflects divine care and justice. This is a critical step, actually, in rebuilding trust for Yahweh, both in human institutions and in divine guidance. Throughout the chapter, Yahweh is portrayed as both the divine warrior and nurturing shepherd. This dual role speaks to the complex needs of a traumatized people. They require protection from external threats and tender care for internal wounds. The promise of a future king, a messianic figure who embodies divine values, offers a new symbolic center around which the community can reorganize its identity. This figure is not just a political solution, but a theological anchor, providing hope, coherence, and direction. Finally, the imagery of vegetation and individual blessing that we find towards the end of the chapter suggests that restoration is both communal and personal. To everyone, the vegetation in the field, to all the sheep. Each member of the community is invited to participate in the covenant anew, to rediscover their place in the collective story. This inclusive vision affirms that healing is not just survival for God, it is flourishing. In sum, Zechariah 10 models a process of identity reconstruction that moves from disorientation to reorientation, from fragmentation to integration, from passive victimhood to active covenantal engagement. It offers a theological roadmap for communities seeking to rebuild after trauma, rooted in memory, sustained by divine provision, and guided by a renewed symbolic universe. The second point, symbolic healing and rituals. Rituals and symbolic practices play a central role in the healing process of trauma. Societies often create rituals of remembrance, mourning, or reconciliation to help individuals and communities re-establish a new symbolic universe that incorporates trauma. These rituals provide a space for processing the pain, grieving the loss, and integrating the trauma into a broader cultural or spiritual framework that can make sense of it. Zechariah 12, interestingly, presents a prophetic vision in which divine intervention, symbolic transformation, and communal mourning converge to restore a traumatized community's symbolic universe. Set against the backdrop of a vulnerable post-exilic Judah, the chapter offers a liturgical framework for healing collective wounds through ritualized acts of empowerment, remembrance, and repentance. The first half of the chapter, verses 1 through 9, depicts Jerusalem not as a passive recipient of divine favor, but as an active agent of resistance and redemption. Through richly symbolic imagery, Jerusalem is described as a cup of staggering against the enemies, a heavy stone, a blazing pot, all through God's empowerment. The city becomes a locus of divine strength and judgment. These metaphors function as ritual symbols, reconstituting the community's identity and anchoring it in a renewed theological narrative. The transformation of even the weakest individuals, says the text, into figures like David. The weakest will be like David, says the text. And the elevation of the house of David to resemble God. The house of David will be like God, says the text. Like the angel of the Lord himself. Signal a communal reimagining of leadership and agency. This symbolic empowerment serves as a ritual of identity reconstruction, healing the community's fractured self-image and restoring its sense of purpose. Yet, the most profound ritual arrives in verses 10 through 14, where triumph gives way to tears. God pours out a spirit of grace and pleas for mercy upon the people, initiating a nationwide mourning for him whom they have pierced, says the text. This collective lamentation is not merely emotional. It is of remembrance and repentance. It is ritualized grief, I skipped a line. Families and tribes mourn separately, suggesting a structured communal process of remembrance and repentance. In this act, the trauma of violence and loss is not denied, but integrated into the community's spiritual framework. The mourning becomes a sacred space for processing pain, acknowledging divine grace, and re-establishing a symbolic universe that can hold both judgment and mercy. I do not have time to explore all of it here, but I suggest in the commentary that what you have is Yahweh empowering them, bringing them to war, fighting against their enemies and therefore against their trauma. And as they win the battle, at a certain point they look back, and the one who had empowered them has been pierced by enemy fire. That's the idea. That the Lord, as he protects them, he falls in battle with them. It's the death of Yahweh. That chapter is just amazing. And the idea is that through that fall, he gives way for this reconceptualization of their own wounds. So Zechariah 12 thus enacts a liturgy of healing. Through symbolic practices of empowerment and mourning, the community is invited to reimagine its place in God's redemptive story. The rituals described, both martial and mournful, offer a pathway for integrating trauma into a renewed cultural and theological identity. In doing so, they fulfill the essential function of ritual after collective suffering: to make sense of pain, to restore meaning, and to re-anchor the community in a symbolic universe that can sustain hope. So as a conclusion, the relationship between trauma and the symbolic universe is dynamic. Trauma disrupts the frameworks of meaning that sustain individuals and societies, compelling a reorganization of beliefs, values, and perceptions of reality throughout or towards healing. In response, communities engage in meaning-making and reconstruction to restore or redefine their symbolic worlds, a process marked by resilience, though rarely linear. Zechariah 9 through 14 then exemplifies the divine program for Judah's symbolic reconstruction after exile, offering a paradigm for eschatological existence amid trauma. There are much more in these chapters. I can only touch in 2 points, okay? There's much more. The text juxtaposes then promises of future restoration with the painful memory of Judah's failures, loss of identity, divine favor, and sovereignty, creating tension between past promises and present realities. This study then argues that Zechariah provides a framework for rebuilding Judah's shattered symbolic universe, shaped by religious, social, political, and cultural symbols. Through themes of judgment and redemption, Zechariah recenters Judah's identity on the messianic figure and Jerusalem's renewal. Its eschatological vision offers healing and profound transformation, framing restoration as both divine gift and covenantal responsibility. This strategy radicalizes the concept of divine restoration in the face of traumatic oppression. It is at the same time a divine gift and a covenantal right for those who are part of the covenant, without dismissing either Judah's traumatic past or her covenantal responsibilities. Thank you.